The modern Prometheus doesn't suffer the eagle on the rock. His torment is purely internal psychological.
That is the modern update. The punishment shifts from the external torment of the eagle to the internal psychological torment of guilt and alienation. Victor is punished by the results of his own success.
Suddenly, they're tearing down the viable apartment projects to start building, I don't know, massive 100-story skyscrapers that will take 10 years to complete. Or speculative new factories for products that don't exist yet.
And those long-term, super ambitious projects, those are the malinvestment. It accounted for over 33% of the variation in math scores and about 15% in science scores.
33% in math. Wow. That's telling you that the intrinsic drive to know is often more important than just raw cognitive ability.
It's the difference between memorizing a formula and wanting to understand why the formula works.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are immersing ourselves in, well, in the very thing that probably brought you here in the first place.
Curiosity.
Exactly. We're looking at the foundational mechanism that powers all learning, all progress, and all exploration. If you're listening to this, you are, by definition, a learner. You want context, you seek knowledge, and you're driven by that little urge to find out what comes next. But what is that urge, really? Where does it come from? And how does your brain actually create that feeling of wanting to know?
It's a huge question. I mean, this is the engine of human progress we're talking about. And yet, for something so pervasive, you see it in a baby shaking a rattle and in a physicist pondering the universe, the scientific community has wrestled for, over a century, trying to nail down its mechanics.
So for today's deep dive, we're digging into the sources to explore the neurobiology and the psychology of the inquisitive mind. And we're going to treat curiosity not just as, a nice personality trait, but as a critical biological imperative.
And the word itself gives us a clue, doesn't it?
It really does. When you look at the origin, curiosity comes from the Latin cura.
Meaning care.
Right, care. So at its linguistic root, it's not just about being nosy. It's a quality related to deep inquisitive thinking. It's investigation, exploration, and ultimately learning because you care.
That etymology is so important. It connects the drive to explore with the mental investment, the care that's required to actually prioritize new information. It is, the absolute fuel for human development.
Every major leap forward.
Every single one in science, in language, in industry. You can trace it all back to someone caring enough about an unknown to go after it.
And what's so fascinating is that this isn't some high-level human-only invention. We see this exploratory behavior everywhere we look.
All over the animal kingdom. That universality points to a very deep evolved function. Our research shows this drive in species is different as apes, cats, rodents.
Dolphins, elephants.
Right. And even in highly intelligent invertebrates like octopuses or birds like corvids. And for humans, it's there from day one, from infancy right through to old age.
So that widespread biological nature, it confirms this isn't just a cultural thing. It has to be a fundamental survival tool.
Absolutely. We understand curiosity as a core evolutionary adaptation. The main benefit is that it just dramatically increases an organism's ability to learn about its environment, adapt to it, and ultimately thrive.
But to really get a handle on it, the sources make a clear distinction. There are two different types, or maybe two faces, of curiosity.
That's a great way to put it. Yes, two distinct forms.
One is a bit more primitive, and the other is, it feels distinctly human.
Exactly. So the first is what we call perceptual curiosity. This is the more innate, sensory-driven behavior you see across the animal kingdom. It's the physical act of investigation.
A cat batting at a string?
Perfect example. Or a rat sniffing a new corner in its maze. It's triggered by immediate sensory novelty. What is this new thing? What does it feel like, smell like?
And then there's the other kind, the more abstract, high-level drive.
Which is epistemic curiosity. This goes beyond just sensory input. It's the desire for knowledge and understanding for its own sake. It's that internal hunger for information, for a new skill, for resolving an intellectual puzzle.
So that's the difference between exploring what a rock feels like,
Which is perceptual.
and exploring why that rock is structured the way it is.
Which is epistemic. That's what drives a theoretical physicist or a historian. It's a need to know.
And if we're talking about evolution, we have to talk about the force pushing us toward the new. which the sources call neophilia.
Right, neophilia, the love of new things. It's the motivational force that gets us out of our comfort zone. But there's a really important counterweight to that, especially as we get older.
The fear of the unknown.
Neophobia.
Precisely. Neophobia, the fear of the new, is often adaptive. It encourages caution once you've kind of mapped out your environment. So curiosity, or neophilia, provides that counterbalance. It makes sure we stay flexible enough to seek out information about new threats or new opportunities. So it's this constant tension, this push and pull between seeking novelty and avoiding threat.
And that's exactly what the big psychological theories try to explain.
Which is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack the three main psychological models for why we're curious, and then we'll get into the really amazing stuff. The neurological structures, the reward pathways that literally power this drive in our brains. Okay, so let's get into the psychological landscape. The first big idea was that curiosity is basically about relieving discomfort, like hunger or thirst. This was a curiosity drive theory, sometimes called the tension model.
Right, this gained traction in the mid-20th century. It builds on these earlier ideas of drive reduction, positioning curiosity as what they call an appetitive drive.
Right.
The hypothesis is pretty simple. We're motivated to act when we need to get rid of some undesirable internal state.
Okay, so with hunger, the undesirable state is an empty stomach. What's the undesirable state that triggers curiosity?
Uncertainty or ambiguity. The core idea here is that our minds want things to make sense, to be coherent. So when you're faced with something unfamiliar, a gap in your knowledge, it disrupts that coherence. And that creates this uncomfortable feeling of dissonance.
It's like an intellectual itch.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
You find something you don't understand, the mental coherence is broken, and this tension builds until you just have to scratch that itch by finding the answer.
Exactly. The drive kicks in and it compels you to gather information, to explore, to make sense of the unfamiliar. And once you get that understanding, the dissonance is gone, the tension is reduced, and the curiosity drive quiets down.
It makes a lot of sense for, a specific puzzle you need to solve, but the sources point out a pretty big flaw here, which is why other theories had to come along.
The major shortcoming is that it's purely a reactive model. It only explains curiosity when it's prompted by some external thing, some existing uncertainty. It completely fails to explain curiosity when there's an absence of anything new.
You mean
profound boredom? Right. Think of someone just sitting in a completely predictable low stimulation room. They aren't trying to resolve an ambiguity that's already there. They're actively looking for stimulation to relieve the boredom.
So if curiosity is only about reducing tension, why does it fire up when there's no tension to begin with?
That conceptual gap leads us right to the next big leap in psychology, the optimal arousal theory. We call it the balance model. This idea, really championed by Daniel Berlin, it just fundamentally changed how we think about motivation.
Okay.
It suggested we're not just driven to reduce stimulation to zero. Instead, we're motivated to maintain a pleasurable, moderate state of stimulation, an optimal point of arousal.
So curiosity is like the brain's thermostat. It's trying to keep us in that Goldilocks zone, not too chaotic, but not too boring either.
That's the perfect analogy. Curiosity becomes the tool we use to manage our internal stimulation level. It pushes us back toward that comfortable middle ground from either extreme. And this explains both kinds of exploration we see.
Okay, so let's break down those two directions. What happens if arousal gets too high?
If arousal is too high, it's often caused by what Berlin called cloud variables.
Yeah.
Things like novelty, complexity, conflict, uncertainty. They grab your attention because they force your brain to make comparisons.
Right.
So when those spike your arousal, you use exploratory behavior to learn about the stimulus, to understand it, and that reduces the arousal back down to your optimal zone. This is often called specific exploration.
So if I see a headline that says, "Shocking secret revealed," the novelty and conflict drive my arousal up. I click it to get the specific knowledge and bring that arousal back down.
Precisely. You're closing a specific high-tension gap. But now think about the opposite. Arousal is too low. The environment is predictable, unchallenging, boring.
That's where diversive exploration comes in.
Correct. When arousal dips, the boredom itself becomes unpleasant, so the person engages in exploratory behavior, diversive exploration, to increase stimulation, to find any puzzle, just to bring their arousal back up to that optimal point. This theory is just so much more robust because it explains both sides of the coin.
It really reframes curiosity from being just a reaction to tension to being this sophisticated, constant maintenance system. But there's a third model, right? The cognitive consistency theory.
Yes, the inconsistency model. And this one connects curiosity directly to other primal emotions, like fear.
How does that one work?
This model focuses on logical processing. It says arousal increases when there's a logical inconsistency between your mental model, what you expect to happen, and what you actually perceive happening.
So the brain is constantly making predictions, and when reality doesn't match up, that generates the energy that demands a response.
Exactly. And the response depends on how big that deviation is. If the inconsistency is small, manageable, that triggers curiosity. You gather a little information to update your mental model, and boom, consistency is restored. You've learned something.
Like if my train is 5 minutes late, a quick check of the schedule, I update my expectation, and the inconsistency is gone.
But if the deviation is massive, the model predicts a totally different emotional reaction.
Okay.
If the inconsistency is huge, highly unexpected, maybe threatening, the theory says that massive arousal isn't linked to curiosity, but to defensive mechanisms. Fear or aggression.
Fear makes sense. It prompts you to flee, to get away from the stimulus, which removes the inconsistency from your perception. But aggression, how does aggression fit?
In this context, aggression is seen as a way to forcefully manipulate your perception to match your expectation. If your expectation is that the world is orderly and something wildly unpredictable happens, one response is to attack the source of that inconsistency, to try and force reality back into the shape you expected.
Wow. Okay, so these three models really show an evolution in thinking. From a simple tension reliever to a complex balancing act to a system for managing the gap between what we expect and what we see.
Exactly. And as we move into the neurobiology, we see the brain doesn't just manage this with abstract processes. It runs on a powerful, ancient, hardwired reward system that makes getting new information feel inherently good, almost addictive.
All right, so let's get into the physical brain. You're saying that the motivation to explore, to move toward the unknown, is actually pleasurable.
It's intrinsically rewarding. This is where the psychology meets the hardware. To understand why we're motivated to learn, we have to look at the brain's methyl-limbic reward pathway.
So seeking knowledge isn't just some noble, high-minded thing. Our brains are chemically reinforcing it, treating a new piece of information like getting a piece of chocolate.
That's a great way to think about it. We're talking about the mesolimbic pathways, which are these core circuits that run on dopamine. This system is designed to assign value to things and interpret good outcomes as rewards. And crucially, it's all about anticipation. The drive to learn is prompted by the anticipation of that dopamine hit.
That makes the wanting of knowledge a physical drive. But here's the key question, and this connects back to the optimal arousal theory. Does the brain value a new answer more than one it already knows?
The research on this is really clear. Studies consistently show that higher amounts of dopamine are released when the reward, the information, is unknown. When the stimulus is new and unfamiliar, you get a bigger dopamine spike compared to when it's predictable. That novelty literally increases the reward value.
That's the neurochemical basis for neophilia, for loving new things.
Exactly.
Okay, let's zoom in on the specific brain structures. The central hub for this feeling of wanting is the nucleus accumbens, right?
The nucleus accumbens is absolutely critical. It's a cluster of neurons deep in the brain, and it's essential for kicking off that reward pathway activation. When it releases dopamine, it fuels that sense of wanting, that motivation to go get the new information.
But there's a difference between the wanting and the actual satisfaction of getting the answer.
A very important distinction. This is the difference between wanting and liking. Dopamine drives the wanting, the motivation. But the nucleus accumbens also releases other neurotransmitters like opioids, which are more associated with the sensation of liking or pleasure once you've gotten the information.
So dopamine makes you click the article, but opioids are what make you feel satisfied after you've read it.
Basically, yes. And research has shown you can separate these. You can block the liking pathway without stopping the wanting pathway. It shows that curiosity is first and foremost about the drive to get the information, which is then reinforced by the pleasure.
That's fascinating. We can be addicted to the pursuit even if the payoff isn't what we thought it would be. Okay, what about the other structures? The caudate nucleus.
The caudate nucleus is also part of this system. It seems to be involved in the executive function side of things. It helps anticipate the possibility of a reward and then integrates that into a plan of action. It's part of the engine that says, hey, maybe we should check that out.
And you mentioned that this whole system needs to stay in a sweet spot, which brings us to a chemical I wouldn't have expected here. Cortisol, the stress hormone.
Right. This connection is crucial for understanding that Goldilocks zone. Cortisol is the body's main stress regulator. But in the context of curiosity, it seems a small, regulated release of cortisol, a little bit of psychological stress, actually encourages exploratory behavior. It nudges you out of complacency.
So just enough tension to make the reward of new information seem attractive.
Exactly. It helps maintain that optimal arousal level. But the dose is critical. Too much cortisol, the kind you get from high stress or fear, initiates a global back-away response that completely shuts down curiosity. The brain switches from "this is stimulating" to "this is dangerous."
Okay, so beyond motivation, curiosity needs basic cognitive tools to work. It needs attention, memory, and learning. You can't be curious about something you're not paying attention to.
Absolutely. Attention is the gatekeeper, and structures like the striatum help coordinate this. The striatum is like a bridge. It links the motivational signal from the dopamine pathways with the physical movement, turning the drive into the action of exploring.
And what about the precuneus? The sources had something really compelling here about brain density.
This is fascinating. The precuneus is involved in attention and retrieving episodic memories. And what researchers have found is a significant correlation between the amount of gray matter density in the precuneus and a person's level of curious behavior.
So people who are naturally more curious might literally have a more physically developed brain in that area.
It suggests a structural predisposition, at least in part. And of course, the whole point of this system is better memory and learning. When you encounter novel information, the dopamine tags it with a high reward value.
And that makes the memory stick.
Exactly. The brain prioritizes resources for encoding information that came with a pleasure hit. That's why, as one researcher put it, curiosity is the wick in the candle of learning.
And the brain's memory specialists, the hippocampus and the parahippocampal gyrus, or PHG, they're running this whole show.
The hippocampus's job is to determine novelty. It's the comparison machine that says, "Have I seen this before?" And the PHG, which surrounds the hippocampus, seems to amplify the process. It helps crank up the neural signaling related to the new information, making sure the motivation is fully integrated with the memory-making process.
Okay, so we have the psychological theories and the neurobiological wiring. Let's look at how this all plays out in the real world, starting with its purest form, childhood.
Jean Piaget, the famous developmental psychologist, had this wonderful idea of children as born scientists.
And you see it in their behavior all the time.
Constantly. A baby who keeps dropping a spoon from their high chair isn't just making a mess. They're conducting an experiment. They're testing gravity, observing cause and effect. This cycle of active investigation is what drives their intellectual development.
But if we're all born scientists, why does that spirit seem to fade for some people as they go through school? It seems like external factors can really get in the way.
Oh, absolutely. This points to how fragile curiosity can be. It's especially vulnerable to negative emotions, particularly anxiety.
We talked about that with cortisol. High stress shuts the system down.
And in a classroom setting, that has a direct, observable effect. One large study found a clear negative link. Children with higher anxiety engage in way less curious behavior. They don't ask as many open-ended questions. They stick to the safe, known tasks.
That's a tragic paradox, isn't it? The learning environment, if it's too high pressure, can actually suppress the one trait that leads to deep learning.
It's like an anxiety filter that blocks the neurological pathways. But when curiosity is nurtured, the academic benefits are huge, and they're quantifiable.
The sources had some specific data on this.
They did. When researchers analyzed high school performance, they found that an aptitude for curiosity, along with motivation and creativity, was a massive predictor of achievement. It accounted for over 33% of the variation in math scores and about 15% in science scores.
33% in math. Wow. That's telling you that the intrinsic drive to know is often more important than just raw cognitive ability.
It's the difference between memorizing a formula and wanting to understand why the formula works. The curious student puts in the extra time, and as we know from the neurobiology, that leads to much better retention.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Curiosity isn't just for academics. It's essential for navigating our human world. Let's talk about social curiosity.
Social curiosity is just applying that same drive to the social environment. It's what helps us adapt to really complicated social situations, watching people at a party, figuring out the norms in a new place.
It's how we map the human terrain, learning nonverbal cues, predicting how people will react. It's a survival mechanism for a social species.
Totally. It's epistemic curiosity aimed at the interpersonal world.
But that drive can also lead us to things that are unpleasant, disturbing even. Which brings us to the really strange topic of morbid curiosity. Why are we drawn to things like death and violence?
It's a real psychological puzzle. Researchers even have a morbid curiosity scale to measure interest in things like the macabre or understanding mass murderers.
So what are the theories? Why does our curiosity system fire up for tragedy?
Well, from an evolutionary perspective, it could be a form of risk assessment. By learning about threatening situations, even from a distance, we're gathering data on how to avoid those threats ourselves.
So watching a documentary about a disaster is just the brain collecting threat avoidance data.
That's one idea. But psychologists suggest deeper motivations, like empathy, or a profound need to find order in chaos. We might be trying to understand a perpetrator to make their actions seem less random and more predictable.
That idea of imposing order on chaos is really powerful.
It is. One journalist, Erika Engelhaupt, suggested it's a drive to set our minds at ease by reassuring us that even death and destruction follow the rules of the natural world. The brain is trying to find the boundaries of the chaos to make it make sense.
Even Aristotle noticed this, right? He said, we enjoy paintings of things that would normally disgust us.
And we still do it. A 2017 paper showed that people chose to look at graphic images for longer than neutral ones. The gruesome and the unknown have this powerful, if uncomfortable, pull on us.
So, as we round this out, we need to make one last key distinction. State versus trait curiosity.
This is a really useful distinction. State curiosity is temporary and situational. It's triggered by something immediate. Why did that coffee shop change its hours? Once you find out, the state is gone.
But trait curiosity is different. It's part of your personality.
Exactly. It's a stable internal characteristic. Someone with high trait curiosity is always trying new things, learning new skills, traveling, just for the sake of discovery, not because of one specific trigger.
And philosophically, that trait is seen as a huge virtue.
It is. It's considered an intellectual virtue for acquiring knowledge, but also a moral virtue because the drive to understand the world and other people cultivates care and empathy.
And now this concept is moving into technology. It's being used to train artificial intelligence.
This is one of the most exciting modern applications. AI agents are being trained using intrinsic motivation, where curiosity is defined quantitatively as the agent's uncertainty in predicting its own actions.
So they're basically coding the cognitive consistency theory into the AI.
It's a great way to think about it. The AI gets a reward, not for winning a game, but just for exploring what it doesn't know how to do yet. It's rewarded for reducing its own uncertainty.
And does it work?
Incredibly well. Studies have shown that AIs rewarded only for curiosity can learn to master complex games and tasks. It just proves how powerful that intrinsic drive to resolve uncertainty really is, whether it's in a brain or a computer. So, to pull it all together, curiosity is so much more than a simple trait. It's this highly evolved, deeply neurological drive. It's the brain's thermostat, keeping us balanced between the paralyzing fear of too much uncertainty and the debilitating boredom of too little stimulation. It uses the reward system dopamine for the wanting, opioids for the liking, to motivate us to learn and to make sure that new learning really sticks in our memory.
And the sources we reviewed point to this crucial tension that we should probably leave everyone to think about. It's about how we, as a society, value different kinds of knowledge.
Right. There's this growing concern that the intense focus on disease-driven research with a clear, immediate goal might be overshadowing the foundational curiosity-driven research.
They call that blue skies research. It's exploration for its own sake, with no obvious practical payoff. But history shows that nearly every major leap forward, from lasers to genetics to mRNA technology, grew out of that kind of pure, open-ended inquiry.
And we also touched on the idea that formal education can sometimes unintentionally discourage that born scientist spirit by focusing too much on structured outcomes instead of exploration.
So given that we know curiosity can be nurtured and that it's absolutely essential for deep learning, here's the final thought to mull over. What field are you allowing yourself to explore purely out of curiosity today, without a practical goal attached? Will you prioritize the blue skies in your own learning?
Something to think about as you anticipate your next intellectual reward.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is pretty simple. We take a dense stack of sources, pull out all the crucial knowledge, and arm you, the listener, with what you need to be genuinely well-informed.
Today, we're going on a bit of a methodological journey. We're exploring a corner of economic thought that, well, it often stands proudly outside of the university consensus.
We are diving into the Austrian School of Economics.
Right. A group of thinkers who really challenge the very foundation of how mainstream economics is done.
Yeah, that's right. This school gets labeled heterodox all the time, which basically means it diverges, and pretty significantly, from the usual Keynesian or neoclassical models you hear about. So our goal today is to unpack the core principles of this school. This radical focus on the individual, their unique theory of money, their critiques of central planning.
And maybe most importantly, figure out why these ideas, which are a century old, are suddenly having this huge resurgence.
Especially in things like decentralized finance and tech. It's everywhere now.
It is, and it's not just an alternative perspective. I mean, it's a total reframing of the questions we should be asking. The Austrians offer a methodology that really prioritizes things like uncertainty, subjective knowledge, human action, all over mathematical models and big aggregate stats.
Understanding that difference is, I think, the key to grasping a lot of modern debates about money.
It really is.
And we have to start with the origin story, because it includes one of the best intellectual jabs in history. The name Austrian school. It was actually meant to be an insult.
It's true. And it points to this really deep philosophical fight that was happening in the late 19th century in Europe. It was famously called the Methodenstreit.
The methodology quarrel.
Yeah, the quarrel over methods.
So tell us a bit more about that. Who was fighting and what were they fighting about?
Okay, so on one side you had the very powerful German historical school. Their argument was that economics couldn't really be a science of universal laws.
So no one-size-fits-all rules.
Exactly. They believed that any economic policy had to come from, deep historical study, from empirical data that was super context specific. They basically just rejected abstract theoretical models.
Okay, so they're looking at history, at specific countries to understand economics, and the Austrians.
The Austrians, led by Karl Menger, they insisted on the complete opposite. They said that, yes, economic theory can be derived from universal logical principles of just human behavior.
So they were all about abstract deductive reasoning.
Right. And the German school, trying to dismiss Menger and his colleagues, just scornfully labeled them the Austrian school.
The implication being that they were provincial, like out of touch.
Totally. Backwards, disconnected from the real empirical world, just a bunch of guys in Vienna stuck in old ways of thinking.
But they just kind of leaned into it. They took what was meant as a derogatory term and turned it into their brand.
They absolutely did. And the whole movement really kicks off in Vienna in 1871 with Menger publishing his Principles of Economics. And then Menger, along with his successors, Eugen von Brumbauvwerk and Friedrich von Weiser, they laid the groundwork for that first wave.
And that set the stage for later giants like Mises and Hayek.
That's the one.
Okay, let's unpack the intellectual engine here. Because if you're going to build a completely separate economic theory, you need some fundamentally different starting points. For the Austrians, this comes down to two big ideas: methodological individualism and methodological subjectivism.
This is the absolute core. You have to get this to get the rest. So methodological individualism is the central, non-negotiable plank of the whole thing.
Okay.
It argues that all social and economic phenomena, price changes, recessions, whatever, they have to be analyzed by breaking them down into the motivations and actions of individuals.
Right, because mainstream economics loves looking at the aggregates, right? GDP, national unemployment, the CPI.
Yeah, the big picture numbers.
But the Austrians are saying, wait, those are the results, not the starting point for your analysis.
That's it, exactly. The source material puts it perfectly. Groups or collectives cannot act except through the actions of individual members. Groups do not think. People think.
So an Austrian economist looking at a recession isn't going to start with a national consumption model.
No. They're going to start with how individual entrepreneurs made choices based on the interest rate signals they were getting and how individual consumers adjusted their own spending and saving habits. It all starts at the micro level.
Okay, so if we accept that everything has to start with the single person, the single actor, then the next question is, how does that person make decisions? Which leads us right to methodological subjectivism.
It's the perfect transition, because if you're focused on the individual, you have to admit that their actions are caused by their own subjective choices. And that includes not just what they want, but crucially, their own personal knowledge, their expectations for the future.
And their time preference.
And their time preference, which is huge. how much you value something now versus getting it later, that's a deeply subjective calculation.
This is where they really break the mold. I mean, compared to neoclassical models that often treat people like, hyper-rational agents with perfect information.
Yeah, right. Like they're all just calculating machines. The Austrian actor is basically swimming in a sea of uncertainty.
And that's more realistic.
It is. The Austrian insight is that economic reality is fundamentally subjective. It's known only partially and only locally by each individual, and that fragmented knowledge is the key to understanding how the whole economy works.
What's so fascinating to me is that even though the school has this, radical difference in methodology, some of its earliest contributions are now just completely baked into every standard Econ 101 textbook.
Oh, absolutely. These are the aha moments that show their influence.
So what's the first big one?
The subjective theory of value and marginalism. Before Menger and this marginalist revolution in the 1870s, a lot of classical thinkers, including Marx, they believed in the labor theory of value.
Which is the idea that an object's value comes from the amount of labor it took to make it.
Exactly, the objective cost of the labor input.
And this is the famous paradox of water and diamonds, right?
That's the classic example. Water is essential for life, but it's cheap. Diamonds are, for survival purposes, useless, but they're incredibly expensive. The labor theory of value just couldn't explain that properly.
So how did Menger solve it?
With his subjective theory. He said, value isn't in the object or in the labor, it's in the mind of the consumer. A good's value is determined by the satisfaction the individual expects to get from the last unit they consume, the marginal unit.
Okay, so the first glass of water, when you're dying of thirst, is infinitely valuable.
Right.
But by the time you've had 5 glasses, the 6th one, its utility is almost zero. But for diamonds, because they're so rare, the utility you get from even the very first one, that marginal unit, is still super high.
And that subjective valuation is what drives demand, and that in turn influences market prices. That principal marginal utility is completely indispensable to modern economics now.
And the second contribution that's now universal is opportunity cost.
Yep. Explicitly formulated by Friedrich von Weiser. It sounds so simple, but it's incredibly profound.
It's the value of the next best thing you gave up.
The next best alternative foregone. It expresses that basic relationship between scarcity and choice. Because, your time, your money, they're finite. Every decision has a cost, which is what you didn't choose.
It's incredible how that idea is now just standard thinking in business schools, in personal finance. When I choose to buy a new car, my opportunity cost might be the stock market gains I gave up by not investing that cash.
And the Austrians tie this back to subjectivism, too, because how you calculate that opportunity cost is always subjective. It depends on your own time preference, how badly you want something now versus later, and your unique knowledge of what the alternatives might bring.
This intense focus on the individual, on the subjective nature of knowledge, it brings us to what might be the most radical part of the entire Austrian movement. Praxeology.
Ah, yes. This is the heart of the Misesian tradition.
So what is it?
Ludwig von Mises formalized it in his huge book, Human Action, in 1949. Praxeology is this systematic deductive theory that says economic science should be derived exclusively from basic, self-evident principles of human action.
Okay, and what's that self-evident starting point? The basic principle.
That human beings act purposefully. That's it. They choose means to achieve desired ends. Mises argued this is an a priori truth.
Meaning it's true before you even look at any evidence, like a law of logic.
Exactly, like 2 + 2 = 4. You don't need to go out and test it empirically. He says if you accept that single premise, that humans act, you can deductively reason your way to all the necessary laws of economics.
Okay, wait. If we accept that, what does that mean for all the statistics, the empirical studies, the mathematical modeling that basically is modern economics?
That's the massive split. Praxeology actively rejects using those things to establish theoretical laws.
So no data.
Well, not for proving theory. The Misesian view is that you can't get theoretical truths from historical stats because human action is always complex, it's subjective, it's driven by unique knowledge that statistics can never fully capture or predict.
So any statistical average is kind of missing the point because it erases all the individual drivers.
That's the argument. Mises believed when economists use equations and probability, they lose that individual subjective element, so their models might describe a past event, but they can't give you universal predictive truths about human action.
It's a profound challenge. It's basically saying Economics is closer to logic or philosophy than it is to physics.
And that's why, for a long time, Austrian economics was just, as the source says, disregarded or derided, especially when academia shifted towards econometrics and math in the mid-20th century. Mises stood his ground on this fiercely.
So now we take this radical methodology, individualism, subjectivity, this deductive purity, and we apply it to some real-world problems. The first huge one, which really defines the Austrian critique of government, is the economic calculation problem.
This is Mises' intellectual sledgehammer against socialism. He developed it in an essay in 1920, and his argument wasn't just moral or political. He argued that it was logically and economically impossible to run a modern economy without market prices.
And the core problem wasn't a lack of resources, but a lack of information, a failure of price discovery.
Exactly. In a socialist system, the state owns all the means of production. So capital goods, the machines, the raw materials, the factories, they're not actually traded between independent owners.
They're just internal transfers.
Right. If the state moves steel from the state-owned mill to the state-owned tractor factory, there's no real transaction.
No sale, no price.
Correct. They aren't objects of exchange. And without true market prices for those capital goods, the central planners have no way of knowing if they're allocating resources rationally.
So the planner has no way of calculating the opportunity cost. If they use steel to build a bridge, they can't know if society would have valued, say, a new train system or more medical equipment more highly.
The information just isn't there. Mises argued that this process of economic calculation, rationally comparing costs and benefits, is impossible in a socialist commonwealth. Resources would just inevitably be wasted because the planners are essentially flying blind.
And then his student, Friedrich Hayek, he took this idea and expanded it with what's called the Hayekian insight. He focused on the knowledge problem.
Yeah, Hayek's contribution was brilliant. He shifted the focus from just the lack of prices to the total lack of information aggregation. Hayek said the information needed to run an economy, local demands, resource availability, new technologies. It's dispersed. It's tacit. It's only known locally by millions of different people.
Like a jigsaw puzzle with a million pieces scattered all over the world.
That's a great analogy. And the market price is the only mechanism capable of instantly pulling all that fragmented subjective knowledge together into a single usable signal.
So if the price of copper suddenly jumps,
entrepreneurs all over the world immediately know they need to economize on copper. And they don't even need to know why the price went up. They don't need to know if it was a mine strike in Chile or a new manufacturing discovery in Japan. The price tells them everything they need to know to act rationally.
And central planners, by definition, can never have all that local, constantly changing knowledge.
Never. They're epistemologically trapped. It's why, as the sources note, inefficiency is a necessary outcome. And this whole debate was a huge part of the intellectual case against centrally planned economies.
So if the calculation problem attacked central planning, the Austrian business cycle theory, or ADCT, it really goes after central banking.
It does. This theory is in fundamental disagreement with how pretty much all major world governments try to manage their economies today.
So what's the core idea?
ABCT argues that economic cycles, the booms and the busts, they aren't natural features of a market economy. They're actually caused by interference in the money and credit system, primarily by central banks manipulating interest rates.
Okay, so let's walk through the boom phase. How does it get started?
It all begins when a central bank, or the fractional reserve banking system, pushes interest rates down below the natural rate.
The natural rate being what the rate would be if it were just set by people's actual savings decisions.
Precisely. They're voluntary time preferences. The interest rate is a price signal. It's the price of time and capital. And when you artificially lower that price, you send a false signal out to the entire market.
What's the false signal?
The signal is that there's a much bigger pool of real savings available to fund long-term investment than actually exists. So entrepreneurs, they see this cheap money and they start investing heavily in these long-term capital-intensive projects.
And this expansion of the capital structure has a specific name, right? Roundaboutness.
Roundaboutness. It's the process of taking raw materials through multiple long stages of production to get to a final consumer good. The lower the interest rate, the more roundabout the production processes entrepreneurs are willing to fund.
So could you give us an analogy for this, for roundaboutness and what they call malinvestment?
Sure. Think of it like this. If interest rates reflected real savings, builders might only start projects they know they can finish, like standard 2-year apartment complexes. But when the central bank makes credit artificially cheap, it signals that patient capital is abundant.
So they get more ambitious.
Way more ambitious. Suddenly, they're tearing down the viable apartment projects to start building, I don't know, massive 100-story skyscrapers that will take 10 years to complete.
Oh.
Or speculative new factories for products that don't exist yet.
And those long-term, super ambitious projects, those are the malinvestment.
Exactly. Malinvestment is the misallocation of real resources, labor, steel, concrete, into these unsustainable projects. They only look profitable because of that artificially cheap interest rate signal. The actual savings needed to see that 10-year skyscraper through to the end, it just isn't there.
So the whole boom is running on fumes.
Mm-hmm.
It's credit that isn't backed by actual real savings.
Right. And eventually the market has to correct. Consumers, who never actually change their real saving habits, keep spending on consumption goods. This drives up the prices of labor and resources, which starts squeezing the profits of those long-term projects.
They start to realize their costs are way higher than they planned.
And they can't get the capital to finish. That's the bust. The projects are revealed to be unsustainable and have to be liquidated.
So the boom itself created the seeds of its own destruction.
It did. The summary of ABCT is perfect. Monetary factors cause the cycle, but real phenomena constitute it. The central bank's policy is the trigger, but the pain of the bust is the very real process of correcting all those mistakes.
Which is why the Austrian prescription is so different. They'd say Keynesian stimulus during a bust just makes it worse.
Because it props up the malinvestments and prevents the necessary healthy correction from happening.
I want to spend a second on this because it causes so much confusion. The specific Austrian view of inflation.
Ah, yes. The terminology quirk. Mises was incredibly strict about this. For him, inflation is defined as, and only as, an increase in the quantity of money.
Full stop. Not rising prices.
Not rising prices. An increase in the money supply, including what he called fiduciary media, that isn't matched by an increase in the demand for money. That's it.
This is a huge break from how we talk about it today. I mean, everyone from the news anchor to the Fed chair defines inflation as rising prices, the CPI.
I know. But for Mises, rising prices were the consequence of inflation. They were the symptom, not the disease.
So if inflation is the money supply increase, what did he call the rising prices?
He just called it the result. He argued that if policymakers are only focused on controlling the symptom, the rising prices, while at the same time continuing the cause, increasing the money supply, they can never actually solve the problem.
It's like treating a fever with an ice pack while ignoring the infection that's causing it.
Perfect analogy. And this framing completely shifts who's responsible. If the central bank increases the money supply by 10%, that is inflation, even if consumer prices don't move for a year, the price changes might show up in assets first, like housing or the stock market.
And Hayek added a really important warning here, didn't he? About using inflation to boost employment.
He did. He said that any stimulus from inflation only works as long as it accelerates. He argued that trying to maintain just a mild, steady inflation rate eventually stops working because people start to expect it and they adjust their wage and price demands accordingly.
So you have to keep printing more and more money, faster and faster, just to get the same effect.
And that, he argued, leads down a very dangerous path.
As the school became more visible in the mid-20th century, it kind of fractured. Let's talk about the big split between the Mises-Rothbard camp and the Hayek camp.
Right. The split wasn't really over the core foundations like individualism or subjectivity. It was more about how rigid the methodology should be and what political conclusions you should draw from the economics.
So how did the Mises-Rothbard camp define itself?
That camp, which is heavily associated with the Mises Institute today, really embraces the most hardcore, rigorous form of praxeology.
The purely deductive method.
Yes. They basically view any neoclassical methodology, so empirical testing, mathematical models, as fundamentally flawed. And they want to step further and fuse this rigid method with a very strong libertarian political theory, often advocating for anarcho-capitalism or a tiny, minimal state.
So for them, the economics and the politics were inseparable.
You could say that. They saw political individualism as a logical requirement of sound economic thought.
Okay, and what about the Hayek camp? I mean, Hayek won the Nobel Prize in 1974, which gave the whole school a huge boost in visibility.
Hayek's view was, well, more moderate, more pragmatic. It's often associated with places like George Mason University. While Hayek was completely on board with the knowledge problem and decentralization, he was more open to some aspects of neoclassical methodology.
And less absolute in his rejection of government intervention.
Exactly. He saw Austrian economics more as a powerful tool for analysis, not something that was necessarily fused to one specific maximalist libertarian political outcome.
And the sources bring up a really interesting historical point here. They challenge that Mises Rothbard rigidity by pointing back to the founder, Menger.
This is a crucial bit of nuance. Critics point out that Menger himself actually defended some broader state activity, like progressive taxation and labor laws.
So if you apply the rigid political test that some modern Austrians use to exclude Hayek, you might end up excluding the school's own founder, Karl Menger. It raises a really interesting question. Is Austrian economics a purely scientific method, or is it an inseparable political philosophy?
That debate is still going on. But regardless of the internal fights, the school has had a profound, undeniable influence on money policy. We have that famous quote from Alan Greenspan.
Yeah, the former Fed chair.
Yeah.
Greenspan, who was definitely a mainstream guy, said that the Austrian founders have had a profound and, in my judgment, probably an irreversible effect on how most mainstream economists think in this country. So even if the world hasn't adopted the whole Austrian business cycle theory, the core ideas have seeped in.
Absolutely. Concepts like time preference, opportunity cost, and especially the idea that knowledge is dispersed, those have been absorbed into global macroeconomic thinking. They might not use the language of praxeology.
But they can't just ignore the knowledge problem or the structural issues caused by messing with interest rates anymore.
Exactly. The focus on how money affects the structure of production, not just the overall price level, has forced a much better, more critical analysis from everyone.
Which brings us to the ultimate modern battleground for these ideas, the cryptocurrency connection. The alignment here feels almost perfect.
It's uncanny, isn't it? The principles behind crypto, especially Bitcoin, are like a textbook of Austrian thought.
Decentralization, individual sovereignty, and above all, sound money.
Right. They are a direct response to the Austrian critiques of central banking and fiat currency manipulation. Proponents often argue that Hayek, who wanted competition in currencies, would have loved Bitcoin. They see it as a Hayekian escape from the central bank's monopoly.
So how does that work in practice? How does Bitcoin align with the Austrian definition of inflation?
Well, it's simple. Bitcoin has a fixed, mathematically verifiable supply cap of 21 million units. That's it. This design makes inflation, as Mises defined it, an increase in the money supply, impossible.
The idea being that if you eliminate that monetary cause of instability, you protect the real economy from the booms and busts that follow.
That's the theory. And the source material has that great historical comparison with the ray stones of Yap.
Right, the giant stone money.
Yeah. The ray stones worked as sound money because they were huge and really hard to make or move, so you couldn't easily base the currency. But then 19th century colonists showed up with modern tools and could suddenly bring in tons of new stones.
They inflated the supply.
They inflated the supply and destroyed the currency's value. Bitcoin's algorithmic hard cap is designed specifically to prevent that kind of human or political temptation.
But the sources also point out a really fascinating internal conflict here, a theoretical challenge that Bitcoin presents to strict Austrian theory, the regression theorem.
This is a big one. So Mises's regression theorem states that for something to become money, it has to have originated as a commodity that had a prior non-monetary use value.
Like gold or silver. They were used for jewelry and industry before they were ever used as money. That prior use gave them an initial market value and trust.
Exactly. But Bitcoin, it was created out of thin air, purely as a digital mechanism for exchange. It had no prior use value as a commodity.
So it seemed to violate the theorem.
It creates a real theoretical puzzle for strict Misesian thinkers. Bitcoin seems to prove that the regression theorem, while historically descriptive, might not be a necessary condition. It shows that pure digital scarcity, backed by cryptographic trust, might be enough on its own.
So how are modern Austrians dealing with this?
It's an ongoing debate. Some are synthesizing it. They'll argue that maybe the prior use value can be reinterpreted for the digital age. Perhaps the immediate utility of the network itself, the ability to send value across borders without permission, serves as that initial non-monetary use.
So the use value isn't a physical property like shininess, but the service the network provides.
Exactly. It shifts the definition. But regardless of how that theoretical knot gets untied, it's clear the Austrian school provides the intellectual scaffolding for why technologies like Bitcoin were even invented. They're a direct answer to the problems the Austrians identified a century ago.
We have covered a huge amount of ground today. We've gone from the origins of the Austrian school to its intense focus on the subjective choices of the individual,
All the way to its powerful critiques of central planning with the economic calculation problem.
and its controversial theory of business cycles, which really shines a light on how small distortions in the price of capital can lead to massive, real-world misallocations of resources.
Yeah, and even though it's often seen as heterodox, that Austrian emphasis on time, on decentralized knowledge, and on the absolute importance of sound money, it continues to shape modern debates.
It provides the foundation for so many of the movements pushing for economic liberty and self-sovereignty in this new digital world.
It really forces you to question the big aggregate numbers and statistics, and instead to focus on the choices of billions of individuals and the need for stable, predictable rules of the game, especially when it comes to money.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener, based on this whole unique framework. If you accept the Austrian definition of inflation, that it's purely the increase in the money supply and not the rising prices themselves, how does that shift your personal perspective on who is responsible?
Right. When you see prices going up at the grocery store, do you focus on the symptom? Or do you now look for the initial action, the expansion of money and credit that might have happened long before that price tag ever changed?
Something to think about as you navigate the economic news. That's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
We all know the image, right? It's arguably one of the most famous torture scenes in, well, all of Western literature and myth.
Oh, absolutely.
That unforgiving, jagged rock way up in the mountains, the heavy chains biting into immortal flesh, and that terrifying, relentless eagle.
Zeus's personal enforcer.
Exactly. Tearing into a liver that just regenerates every night, making sure that agony is always fresh for the morning.
It is the ultimate statement of divine, tyrannical power meeting this unwavering heroic defiance. It's the original clash between oppressive authority and the restless spirit of ingenuity.
Absolutely. And today, we are diving deep into the story of Prometheus. If you've only ever heard of him as the guy who simply stole fire, you are missing centuries of incredible cultural evolution. He's not just the original rebel.
No, he's so much more.
He's the champion of humanity, the source of our science, our technology, our civilization itself. He is the eternal symbol for every ambitious genius who ever tried to bring a little unauthorized light into the darkness.
And that is precisely the mission of this deep dive. We've gone through the sources, everything from the primal epics of Hesiod to the political poetry of the Romantics, to reveal how this figure, Prometheus, fundamentally transformed over time.
So his myth is like a mirror.
It's a perfect mirror, reflecting how vastly different eras viewed knowledge, defiance, the limits of human ambition, and of course the consequences that follow every great discovery.
So before we get into those huge transformations, let's just establish the basics. Who is the man, or I should say the titan, behind the myth?
Okay, so Prometheus is one of the older generation of deities. He's a titan, son of Iapetus and either Clymene or Asia, Oceanid. And what's critical there is that his lineage links him directly back to that pre-Olympian world.
And he has some very famous siblings.
He does. You have Atlas, of course, Minucius, and maybe most importantly for his own story, his brother Epimetheus.
And the names themselves, I mean, they just lay out the whole drama right there, don't they?
They absolutely do. It's this brilliant conceptual contrast. The name Prometheus, it literally means forethought.
Thinking ahead.
Exactly. From the Greek pro, before, and a root that has to do with, intelligence. He sees what's coming. He understands consequences before they happen.
And his brother is the complete
The
opposite.
total opposite. Epimetheus means afterthought. He's the one who acts first and then, deals with the fallout later. And that intellectual distinction, that tension between foresight and hindsight, it is morally central to the entire mythos.
Okay, let's unpack this evolution. We have to start with the earliest surviving accounts we have from the late 8th century BC. This is where Prometheus is not yet the noble savior of humanity. He's something much more primal, a trickster.
Right. Our foundation begins with the Greek epic poet Hesiod. You find this mostly in his theogony and also in his works and days. And in these texts, Prometheus is introduced with a decidedly negative slant.
He's not the hero.
Not at all. He's a lowly challenger, constantly trying to outsmart and undermine the absolute power of Zeus. He is, you could say, the first great irritant to the new king of the gods.
And the first great act of defiance, the one that really sets the cosmic balance askew, happens at the sacrificial meal at a place called Mekone.
Can you set the scene?
Right.
What was this meal all about? What were the stakes?
The meal at Mekone was crucial. It was meant to be a solemn settling of accounts between mortals and immortals. It was about defining the relationship between gods and men forever.
So establishing the rules of the game.
Precisely. To establish once and for all what tribute men owed to the gods and what men could keep for themselves. And Prometheus steps in here as this self-appointed advocate for humanity and attempts a really brazen trick on Zeus.
So tell us about these two famous bundles. How did he package them to be so deceptive?
He takes a sacrifice bowl and prepares two distinct offerings. The first bundle was the good stuff. The choice cuts of meat, the muscle, all the edible parts that would sustain humanity. But he cleverly hides all this goodness inside the ox's stomach, which would have looked
repulsive. It was a rough, ugly, and displeasing exterior.
And the second bundle, the bait.
Yeah, that was pure deception. It was just the inedible bull's bones. But Prometheus artfully wrapped them entirely in this glistening, tempting fat, the part of the animal that looked the richest and most desirable. So when he presents the choice, Zeus, the king of the universe, chooses the tempting but completely useless bones wrapped in fat.
Okay, but how could Zeus, who's supposed to be all-knowing, possibly fall for such a simple trick? Does Hesiod imply Zeus was genuinely fooled, or was there a longer game being played?
That's the critical question, isn't it? And scholars debate this all the time. In the Theogony, Hesiod says Zeus knew the trick was happening. He wasn't fooled.
So he chose the beta bundle on purpose. Why?
So that he would have a divine precedent, a reason to unleash his vengeance on Prometheus and, by extension, on humanity. He accepted the trick to ensure the balance of justice was tipped firmly in his favor for the coming retribution.
So this set the precedent for how sacrifices would work from then on.
Exactly. From that moment on, humans would keep the nourishing meat for themselves and burn only the bones and fat as a symbolic offering to the gods. Prometheus had successfully fixed the practice of Greek animal sacrifice in humanity's favor.
He secured the food for humanity, but he also earned Zeus's focused personal anger. And Zeus's first move wasn't subtle. It was the withdrawal of the very thing Prometheus had championed.
It was indeed. The withdrawal of fire. Zeus, enraged by the Mekone trick, hides fire from humans entirely. And what's really important to note here, as the sources confirm, is that in this Hesiodic version, humans had fire before.
Oh, so it wasn't a new gift he was withholding, he was taking something away.
Exactly. He actively took away a foundational piece of technology and comfort, plunging humanity into a cold, dark, primitive state.
Which, of course, leads directly to Prometheus's most famous and most consequential crime, stealing that fire back.
He does. He steals the fire back, restoring technology and knowledge to humanity. He does this cleverly, hiding the stolen flames inside a giant fennel stalk, the narthex. It has a dry pit that burns really slowly, and you can't see it from the outside. A perfect container.
But this act is the final straw for Zeus.
It is. This second defiance brings on Zeus's double retribution, one that, in this telling, defines the misery of the human condition forever. Pandora.
Pandora. Her name means all gifts. The first woman, and in Hesiod's very harsh view, the beginning of all human trouble.
She was Zeus's masterpiece of revenge, specifically engineered to appeal to the afterthought brother Epimetheus, who was warned by Prometheus never to accept a gift from Zeus.
But he does anyway.
Of course he does. And Pandora was a collaborative project. Hephaestus crafted her from earth and water, Athena taught her weaving, Aphrodite gave her grace, and crucially, Hermes gave her cunning, deceit, and a bitch's mind. Hesiod explicitly calls her the origin of the deadly race and tribe of women who live amongst mortal men to their great trouble.
Wow. I mean, that is an astonishingly misogynistic origin myth. It frames women not as partners, but as the consequence of divine punishment for Prometheus's crime.
It absolutely is. And this really highlights Hesiod's focus on the decline and troubles of mankind. So Pandora was sent carrying a pithos.
Which is in a box, right? That's a later thing.
Right, that's a much later mistranslation from the 16th century that became popular. This was a large storage jar. And from this jar, she released every single ailment, affliction, mischief, and sorrow into the world. Plague, diseases, everything.
And the defining moment, the philosophical punchline of this whole part of the story, is what gets left trapped inside that jar.
Hope. Help us. Pandora manages to slam the lid shut, too late to contain all the evils, but she does trap hope inside. And the sources are clear. Zeus forced her to seal it. He wanted hope withheld.
Which raises an intense question for you, the learner. Was trapping hope a blessing, ensuring that humans, despite all their suffering, would always have a little bit left? Or was it the ultimate curse?
Exactly. If hope is trapped, does it mean that humans are now perpetually afflicted, yet unable to attain the one thing that might truly bring them relief?
It suggests the suffering itself is inescapable no matter what. That is a very bleak view of the human condition.
It is a profoundly dark exchange in the Hesiodic tradition. Humanity gets fire and knowledge, but the cost is eternal misery and the withholding of true relief. It sets the theological stage for why the world is the way it is.
And the cost for Prometheus himself is that eternal torment we started with. We should detail the geography and the sheer physics of this punishment because it's so central to who he becomes.
The punishment is designed to be unending. Zeus binds him with unbreakable chains of adamantine to a rock face. And the traditional location for this is the Caucasus Mountains, often identified with Mount Elbrus or Mount Kazbek, a place considered the very edge of the known world by the ancient Greeks.
Emphasizing his total isolation.
Utter isolation. And then there's the eagle.
The eagle.
Zeus's sacred animal, his direct extension. Every single day, the eagle tears into Prometheus's liver. And, the Greeks considered the liver to be the seat of strong emotions, of passions, sometimes even the soul itself.
So it's not a random organ.
Not at all. It's deeply symbolic. But because Prometheus is immortal, his liver regenerates every night, ensuring that the pain is cyclical, immediate, and inescapable. It's a dynamic, eternal cycle of destruction and painful restoration.
And though it feels almost like an afterthought in Hesiod compared to the sheer scale of the torment, Prometheus is eventually freed.
Yes. Hesiod notes that many years later, the hero Heracles arrives at the Caucasus while on one of his labors. And with Zeus's explicit permission, and that permission is key, Heracles kills the eagle and breaks Prometheus's chains. But that closure doesn't really negate the immense theological weight of the punishment itself.
So in this Hesiodic foundation, we have this myth that explains sacrifice, the origin of human suffering, the role of women, and the relationship between powerful gods and tricky men. But now we jump forward about 3 centuries into the 5th century BC, and this entire narrative just transforms completely in classical Athens.
Right. The 5th century BC is the great age of Athenian tragedy and philosophy. This is where Prometheus becomes the cultural hero and martyr we recognize today. And the core source for this transformation is the surviving play Prometheus Bound, which is traditionally attributed to the tragedian Aeschylus.
And Aeschylus gives us the first major twist, the one that really reframes Zeus's cruelty as a political act of tyranny, not just justified revenge.
That's the Titanomachy twist. It's a profound political revision. In Hesiod, Prometheus is just a challenger. In Aeschylus, he played a decisive strategic role in securing the victory for Zeus and the Olympians over the other Titans.
So he was on Zeus's side.
He was the reason Zeus won. He provided the foresight and strategy for the new regime to triumph. Which means Zeus's subsequent decision to torture him is transformed from mere punishment into a particularly harsh betrayal. It paints Zeus as a paranoid, ungrateful monarch.
And that idea of betrayal is essential for making Prometheus a sympathetic figure, a political martyr. And the scope of what he gave humanity widens so drastically beyond just fire.
It explodes into a full curriculum of civilization. He's no longer just a fire thief. He's the comprehensive educator. He claims to have taken humanity, which Aeschylus describes as this race of weak, blind creatures living in caves, and single-handedly elevated them.
What are some of the specific arts he claims to have gifted them? This goes way beyond just cooking.
Oh, the list is exhaustive, and it speaks directly to Athenian cultural values. It includes astronomy, teaching men how to read the stars, the art of writing and mathematics, architecture, the domestication of animals, sailing, even medicine. How to mix soothing remedies for sickness. And also the art of divination. This whole list transforms Prometheus into the intellectual champion of scientific and technological progress, which, perfectly justified Athens' embrace of those fields.
Aeschylus also gives him maybe the greatest benefaction of all, saving humanity from total annihilation.
Yes, this is a huge departure from Hesiod. Prometheus asserts that Zeus had actually intended to obliterate the human race entirely, just wipe them out and start over.
And Prometheus stopped him.
He claims he was the only one who stood in the way. He prevented this genocide. So his torture isn't just for stealing fire, it's for saving all of us from Zeus's catastrophic plan.
Yeah.
He becomes humanity's sole advocate, a truly tragic and sacrificial figure.
And this elevated status gives him enormous leverage because he holds the one piece of knowledge that can genuinely threaten Zeus's throne.
The secret knowledge. This is the linchpin of the Aeschylean drama. Prometheus knows of a prophecy, a potential marriage Zeus might make that would produce a son capable of overthrowing him, just as Zeus overthrew his own father, Cronus.
This secret is his ultimate bargaining chip.
It is. We know from the other now lost plays in the trilogy that Zeus eventually reconciles with him. And the secret is widely believed to be about the sea nymph Thetis,
Who Zeus was pursuing.
passionately. The prophecy said her son would be greater than his father. So Zeus, after learning this from Prometheus, backs off. Thetis marries a mortal, Peleus, and their son is Achilles. The greatest hero, yes, but safely mortal, contained. That reconciliation is the price Zeus pays to keep his power.
It's crucial to note that Aeschylus leaves two big things out from Hesiod's version, the Pandora story and the Mecone trick. What is he doing by omitting those?
By removing the trickster elements, the fat-wrapped bones, the deception Aeschylus effectively cleanses Prometheus of any moral ambiguity. He becomes a purely tragic hero. And by omitting Pandora, he removes the misogynistic explanation for human misery and places the blame for suffering squarely on Zeus's political tyranny.
He's rehabilitated.
Completely. From a cunning mediator to a suffering benefactor.
Now, around the same time, we see a really different, more philosophical use of the myth in Plato's dialogue, Protagoras. How does Plato use Prometheus and Epimetheus?
Plato uses the myth to draw a necessary distinction between practical skill and moral virtue. In his version, when the gods create mankind, Epimetheus is in charge of handing out qualities like speed and strength.
And being afterthought, he messes it up.
He's careless. He leaves man completely naked, weaponless, and unprotected. So they gather in communities, but they immediately start fighting because they lack any kind of civic structure.
So Prometheus steps in to solve the immediate survival crisis.
Yes. He steals fire and techne, which is best translated as creative power or craftsmanship, from the shared workshop of Athena and Hephaestus. He gives this to mankind so they can survive, build things, farm, master their environment.
But Plato makes a critical distinction here. Techne isn't enough. Technical skill doesn't create a functioning society.
This is Plato's key insight. He sees this technical skill as necessary, but inferior to the two highest gifts needed for a civilized society. Aegis, reverence or respect for others, and daiho, justice.
And those don't come from Prometheus.
No, those are divine gifts bestowed on men by Zeus himself. So for Plato, Prometheus provides the practical skills for physical survival. But civic virtues, the things that allow a community to thrive, come from a higher, more divine source. Foresight alone isn't enough for moral governance.
What's incredible is that this defiant titan, this enemy of Zeus, was actually the focus of religious worship in Athens itself.
That is a crucial cultural point. There's little evidence of Prometheus temples elsewhere in the Greek world, but Athens was the exception. He was actively worshipped, often right alongside Athena and Hephaestus, the gods of creative skills and technology.
It reflects the city's self-image as a center for progress and art.
Absolutely. He was a patron of craftsmen.
And the method of worship was very public, very civic. Tell us about the Lampedodromia.
The Lampedodromia, the torch relay race, was a major civic event, especially during the Panathenaic Festival, the city's biggest celebration. It was a rigorous relay that served as this tangible link between the gift of fire and the city's creative output.
Where did this crucial race begin and end?
It began at Prometheus's altar, which was located outside the formal city boundary in the grove of the Academy, fittingly, a place associated with learning. Teams would have to pass the flame, and it was apparently very difficult to keep it lit. If the fire went out, you were disqualified.
And the final destination of that flame was symbolic of the Titan's acceptance into Athenian life.
Absolutely. The winning team would bring the living flame into the heart of the city, right up to the Acropolis, and use it to light the sacrificial fire on the great altar of Athena. It physically linked the rebellious gift of fire to the state-sanctioned progress championed by Athena.
He's no longer just a punished Titan, he's a civic patron, a symbol of applied knowledge. And this really sets the stage for his final transformation into the powerful intellectual symbol of the last few centuries, the solitary genius.
Right. As we move into the modern era, the physical punishment becomes less important than its philosophical and psychological meaning. Through the Middle Ages, he was mostly an allegorical figure.
And the Renaissance really starts to weaponize this intellectual interpretation.
Precisely. Figures like Boccaccio in the 14th century offered Neoplatonic readings. He even imagined Prometheus stealing a ray of the divine wisdom from God himself. Then Marsilio Ficino in the 15th century saw Prometheus as an allegory for the human soul seeking supreme truth, with the torture representing the intense intellectual torment brought on by human reason.
So the fire is no longer just technology, it's intellectual consciousness.
Right.
We even see this in Shakespeare's Othello with the phrase Promethean heat, the divine spark of life that once it's gone can't be restored.
All of these philosophical steps culminated in the Romantic period, which is where Prometheus transforms into the symbol we recognize most today, the lone genius resisting oppressive institutional power.
The Romantics were all about revolution, individualism, the power of emotion. How did Prometheus fit into that worldview?
He was the perfect vehicle. The Romantics drew explicit parallels between him and the revolutionary spirit of the age, the French Revolution, the suffering artist, even Milton's Satan, the noble sufferer resisting an arbitrary god. Prometheus was redefined as the creative individual asserting his own power against the oppressive father figure, represented by Zeus.
Let's start with Goethe. His poem Prometheus became this central, fiery text for the German Sturm und Drang, the storm and stress movement.
Goethe's poem is an explosion of defiant individualism. It's a stunning example of misotheism, the hatred of God. The poem is this magnificent, angry monologue where Prometheus addresses Zeus directly and rejects any dependence on him. He declares, "Here I sit and mold man after my own image, asserting his own creative power is equal to, if not bar than, the divine."
So he's not just stealing fire, he's claiming absolute creative autonomy.
Exactly. He's saying, I create the world, I create humanity, and I rely on my own will, not your capricious rule. It turns the conflict into this primal family drama of rebellion.
And this political element was taken to its ultimate conclusion by Percy Bysshe Shelley, who took Aeschylus's tragedy and completely rewrote the ending.
Shelley's Prometheus Unbound is an explicit political and philosophical rewriting. Shelley hated tyranny in all its forms, political, religious, social. So in his version, Prometheus refuses to reconcile. He stays defiant, refuses to reveal the secret, and through the sheer moral force of his suffering and love, he ultimately wins.
He literally dethrones Jupiter.
He does. Jupiter is cast down, and Prometheus is freed, not by permission, but by the power of his own spirit. It symbolizes the triumph of the human heart and intellect over oppressive religion and political tyranny. It's the poetic embodiment of utopian revolution.
And this whole romantic interpretation was cemented in popular culture by the novel that gave the Titan his definitive modern scientific identity, Frankenstein.
Mary Shelley's 1818 novel is subtitled, crucially, The Modern Prometheus. That subtitle is the intellectual key to the whole book. It draws a direct parallel between the Titan's ancient role-creating man from clay, giving life through unauthorized means, and the actions of the scientist, Victor Frankenstein.
Victor is stealing the fire of life through modern science, replacing the fennel stalk with electricity and chemistry. What are the core Promethean themes we see in his quest?
The novel perfectly captures the central dilemma, the relentless human striving, particularly the quest for scientific knowledge and the risk of overreaching, and the unintended consequences. Victor steals the secret of life, but like Prometheus, he pays a terrifying personal price. Isolation, unending torment, and the ultimate destruction of his world because of what his ambition created.
It's interesting that Victor rejects his own creation, kind of mirroring Zeus's rejection of humanity. The modern Prometheus doesn't suffer the eagle on the rock. His torment is purely internal, psychological.
That is the modern update. The punishment shifts from the external torment of the eagle to the internal psychological torment of guilt and alienation. Victor is punished by the results of his own success. He's the scientific genius who achieves the impossible, only to find the ethical consequences destroy him.
This motif is so universal, it clearly goes beyond Greek culture.
Absolutely. You see this pattern globally. In Georgian mythology, the hero Amirani challenged God and was chained in the Caucasus, the same location where birds ate his regenerating organs. It suggests a deep, shared human archetype about the punishment for unauthorized knowledge.
And the comparison to Lucifer, the light bearer, is also everywhere.
It is. Both are figures who bring unauthorized light or knowledge to humanity, and both suffer eternal punishment for it. They're the sympathetic rebels who challenge the absolute authority of a ruling deity for the sake of humanity's awakening.
And his name continues to live on in modern science and discovery, reflecting that eternal link to innovation.
Yes. Permanently branding innovation with the Titan sacrifice. We have the chemical element promethium, we have Saturn's moon Prometheus, and maybe most symbolically, the biography of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, was titled American Prometheus, directly linking the existential consequences of scientific overreach to the atomic age.
From Hesiod's cunning trickster to the father of the atomic age, that is an astonishing cultural journey.
To synthesize this profound shift, we've tracked Prometheus from a primal, cunning trickster punished by Zeus for his deceptions. He evolved into the ultimate philosophical champion of arts and sciences in Athens, a revered civic figure. And finally, he became the lone, defiant genius, risking everything for ambition in the Romantic and modern eras.
The story isn't static. It's a living document about power. The journey shows us that the myth isn't about the fire itself, but what the fire eternally represents: knowledge, autonomy, and the cost of intellectual freedom.
The enduring power of Prometheus lies in his ability to embody that constant universal human tension between the profound desire for knowledge and the existential fear of its consequences, the hubris inherent in crossing divine boundaries. We, the learners, are always seeking the fire, but we must always reckon with the eagle.
And as we close this deep dive, let's circle back to one obscure but really telling detail from the sources: the satirical inclusion of Prometheus in Aristophanes' comedy, The Birds. In this play, Prometheus has reconciled with the gods on Olympus, but he is not the dauntless rebel of Aeschylus.
No, he's presented as a timid god.
A timid god who has to hide under an umbrella so that Zeus won't see him while he's negotiating with Zeus's enemies.
A timid god in disguise, years after enduring all that torment.
Right. So when we focus on the grand, dramatic suffering and the cosmic rebellion, are we missing the quiet, bureaucratic, and maybe deeply anticlimactic reconciliation that often follows the great struggle? Does this satire suggest that even the most revolutionary knowledge eventually gets domesticated, accepted, and perhaps even a bit timid in the face of established power? That is something for you to chew on until our next deep dive.